started my business, and I have this concept in my mind. Okay, I've got to grind. I've got to grind 24/7. I gotta open in the morning. I gotta close at night. I'm cleaning the bathrooms. I'm vacuuming. I'm training clients. I'm training, staff. I'm doing the marketing. I'm doing all of this, and I feel like that I'm obligated. I'm expected to do that if my business is going to be successful. Instead of looking at, and then I become a slave to my business. It becomes this just albatross around my neck, and I started to almost resent it. So, and instead of thinking of it in terms of, okay, how do I structure this business to get what I want out of it? Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Masters in Fitness Business Podcast, where you get to stand on the shoulders of giants. And today I'm bringing you a giant from across the pond, as they say, United Kingdom, London, not London, but England. This is Ben Ivey. And Ben has a unique backstory, and he started working with busy entrepreneurs to help them kind of simplify and kind of manage their stress. And he has an interesting backstory as to why he got into this and his why. So we'll let him get into that. But he's been doing this about 7 years. He's had quite a bit of success with a lot of his clients. So he's going to come on the show and share some of those secrets with us. So Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to share and be on the show.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you, man. I'm glad we got it to work out with the time change and everything. So tell me, where exactly are you in merry old England?
Sure. So I'm southwest of London in Clapham Junction. So for most people, we can just call it London.
Gotcha. Okay, gotcha. All right. So why don't you go ahead and tell our listeners a little bit about what you do, and then I want to jump into why you got into it in the first place.
Sure. Well, we can go straight into the story, really, and that gives people an appreciation. So 7 years ago, I was running a business in Silicon Valley. It was a VR app helping people memorize. And then I ended up having an incredibly life-changing moment whereby I lost my father to suicide. And I saw him the day before. He was my best friend. And I had no idea that something like that could happen. I mean, you hear stories, but it's very different when it happens to someone that you're so close to. And that took me on a journey of self-discovery where I quit my business in Silicon Valley and I started to search as to why is it that people do what they do and how can we create these parallel worlds? Because what often happens is on the surface, things seem okay and what we present to everyone, but underneath there's different things going on. And throughout that journey, I started studying NLP. I did a lot of stuff in China. I'm usually in and out of China twice a year doing talks and giving back. And I started to gain skills to be able to help entrepreneurs from all walks of life to start to manage their overwhelm and their stress. And now ultimately that's led me to helping entrepreneurs from all over the world to live the lifestyle that they thought they would have when they started their business whilst boosting their success, which I think is incredibly important, especially nowadays.
Yeah, no question. No question. I mean, yeah, with COVID, it's thrown everybody's business model under the bus. And they've had to kind of go back to the drawing board. It's like what Custom Auto always said, everybody's got a plan till they got punched in the face. Well, everybody got punched in the face this year, my friend.
Yeah.
So they had to go to plan B or reconfigure. So talking about entrepreneurs and managing their stress and their overwhelm, which I agree, because I had another guest on the show and we talked about how entrepreneurs tend to throw themselves into the work to the detriment of their personal life, where they give everything, they leave it all on the table, and they go home and they've got nothing left. And so their customers and their clients used to get the best of them, and their loved ones get the worst of them. But from your experience, you've been doing this 7 years, been researching it, been speaking on it. So what are some of the biggest things that you see causing that stress or that overwhelm in the entrepreneurs that you work with?
Sure. Well, one of the most common things that I see is something that I call the when I have this, then I will addiction. And as entrepreneurs, we often have this when I have this success, then I'll work on my relationship, then I'll spend time with my family, then I'll look after my health. And obviously, with all the fitness entrepreneurs listening to this and other people as well, there may be a focus on health and business, but often there's other things that fall by the wayside. And I see it's very common that we thrive in a couple of areas, and there's other things that get left behind until we believe we hit a destination or a certain level of success, and then we start to focus on the other areas that really matter to us.
I can see that 100%. That elusive work-life balance. And then somebody told me that it's all your life. So you got to learn how to balance it. And balance is not a static thing. I always thought the concept of balance as being something static. Okay, I spend 50% time here, 50% time here, but I've learned that, especially in the entrepreneur, balance is dynamic. Sometimes you got to do a power shift over here, but then you got to give back and then make that shift over here. So what has been your experience with that?
Well, I think it's incredibly important from a balance perspective that you're never going to be in balance. The whole point of balance is you're making those adjustments. If you imagine someone in a handstand, they're constantly moving their body and adjusting so that they stay in balance. And when I work with entrepreneurs, it's figuring out what is that lifestyle that they want to live, not just when they're successful, but actually as they're building their business. Because what happens is a lot of people start working in their business and it becomes more of a burden than a vehicle for their freedom or their time or the money that they want to generate. And I think the sad thing is that there's so much talk about the hustle. And don't get me wrong, it is important to hustle as an entrepreneur, but the challenge is that if all you're doing is hustling and hustling, it can cause a lot more challenges later down the line. And the truth is, as you mentioned earlier on, you can give everything to your clients, but the truth is, if you're not looking after yourself and those other areas as well, what happens is the level that you can give is actually dwindling, because through time you start to burn out, you start to lose that motivation because you're not giving yourself that time you need to really rejuvenate yourself so you can move forward and have that creativity to really make your business boom.
Yeah, that makes total sense, because you need to have, you can't pour somebody something from your cup if your cup is empty. Yeah. So tell me, like, what's the typical entrepreneur that comes to you saying, Ben, can you help me? Like, what do they look like?
Sure. Well, very typically they're managing their business. They have a small team. But what tends to happen is that they're working in the business and they're not being able to work on the business. What I mean by that is they're involved in a lot of the day-to-day activities. They're still perhaps training people, or they're still working with clients one-on-one. And what tends to happen is that they get stressed that they can't take their business to another level, and they feel like they're hitting a business plateau. And what will often happen is someone will lead with a problem such as marketing. So I have a client, Alex, 2 years ago. He comes, Ben, my issue is marketing. And he runs a software development firm. He's got a team of 12. And now he's thinking marketing is his issue. Now, within the first 5 minutes, I realized marketing isn't the actual issue he's facing, it's perfectionism. And very often when we look at what is stopping us moving forward, there are these patterns that we have. And for him, it was perfectionism, wanting the marketing to be perfect. And as a software developer, it makes sense because you need perfectionism in software because you don't have the bugs. But when you apply that to marketing, what happens is you are self-sabotaging yourself and your own success. So what happens is as he starts to overcome self-sabotage with regards to the perfectionism that he had in his marketing and his business then improved 10x. He started to do things that he wasn't doing before, and he decreased his team by 3 times. And suddenly he's being much more efficient because he actually has the time to work on the business. And I think ultimately that's what it's about. It's about managing our time in a more efficient way so that we can then work on the business and also live the lifestyle that we desire in that process.
Gotcha. That makes total sense. So Thomas Plummer, I've had him on the show a lot of times, and he always says that I can fix your, when he's talking to business owners, he says, I can, he works in the fitness business industry, but he says, I can fix your business, but I can't fix you. Meaning, like if you come in with preconceived ideas or concrete beliefs that you're not willing to change, or behaviors that you're not willing to change, um, then he can't really fix your business if you're not really ready to move off of that position. And I've always heard if there's anything wrong in your business, it's your fault because it's your business, right? Everything comes from you. So I say that to ask you, is your job to really train the entrepreneur to see things differently versus like tweaking their business, if that
Yeah, I
makes
think,
sense?
yeah, ultimately it's gaining that different perspective so you can look at your business in a different way. And very often what tends to happen is as they start to fix their mindset and they fix the challenges that they're facing internally, what happens is the business grows as a result. Because what I tend to find is that the business owner is the biggest stopper in their business, preventing that business growth. And what happens is when you start to overcome some of those challenges that we're facing, and the sad thing is that often we have a lot of blind spots as entrepreneurs on our journey, yet when we can overcome those, what happens is it acts as a snowball effect on the business and things run much easier, you manage your team better, and suddenly you can view things in a different way that you haven't perhaps perceived before.
Yeah, I believe that, absolutely. So what are some of the most common roadblocks that you've helped entrepreneurs with when it comes to themselves?
Sure. Well, I think one of the big things that I see is this analysis paralysis, and this affects many areas of people's lives, whereby there's this information overload that we have. There's so many different blogs and articles and different people's perspectives that what tends to happen is entrepreneurs from all walks of life become overwhelmed with so many different options. And the challenge is that can impact your health, that could be with regards to your family, like how do you have those relationships as well as the business. And I think the biggest thing is overcoming that analysis paralysis that we have and actually making key decisions to pivot your business and move it forward. And I think that especially when we look into COVID and the period of uncertainty, I think that a lot of business owners were living in fear of, I need to look after my resources because otherwise I don't know when my next client's coming in or how I'm going to pivot. And I think it's there where you have to lean in and start to reinvest and start to do things differently so that you can pivot in the right way as opposed to holding back. And I think it's often overcoming that fear during those periods of uncertainty that can really help us as entrepreneurs to move forward in a way where we can adapt to the times as they change. Because the truth is, times are changing now faster than they ever have.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So what are some of the tricks or tips that you do? How do you get entrepreneurs to overcome those fears?
Sure. Well, I think what's incredibly important is that when I work with someone, it's figuring out what is really causing that and where does that come from? Because what I noticed that, I get to work with entrepreneurs from the US, from China, from India. The story changes, but the pattern's the same. And very often what we see is that we have these ways in which we deal with things which are very common, and we go through that certain scenario and it just reoccurs in our lives. So for example, one of the ways to discover this is figuring out, are you facing the same sort of problems time and time again? A lot of business owners say, oh, Ben, my employees just don't get it, right? I just don't know why they just can't do the job. And they're all the same, all of them. And what's happening there is very often, and obviously you're smiling because you can relate to this at some level, is that it's the business owner who's got the challenge there to overcome. So it's figuring out, what is the real issue? Is it that they need to start managing their employees better, or do they need to figure out really what's going on with them? And then once I identify that, it's then giving them that leverage and that awareness to then overcome it on a consistent basis, and then to apply that where it's something that is lasting change as opposed to an insight that then the entrepreneur doesn't do anything with. And I think installing the right habits and systems and awareness in place allows someone to have that sustainable change over time, which I think what is everyone looking for?
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, because I know for me, when I became a business owner, I had to become a better leader. I was a pretty crappy leader when I first started out. And I had to become a better leader for the sake of my team and for the sake of my business and for my sanity too. Because if you're a crappy leader, you tend to have a lot of turnover.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to get a good, solid team that was going to be there for a while. In order to do that, I had to become a better leader, and I found that I had to do some self-exploration and kind of fix some of the chinks in my armor, so to speak, and become a better person if I was going to become a better leader. I mean, do you find that to be a theme with the entrepreneurs you work with?
Yeah, I think that definitely becoming a better leader impacts your business from a variety of different standpoints, whether that is your ability to be able to make faster decisions. Because very often when we look into leadership, it's making decisions fast and changing them slow, especially when you have so many different facets of the business to manage. And I think this affects people at all levels. There was a lady called Ju Bei who's a co-founder of a company out in China. It's an education company, but she has 30 different employees, and I think that the challenge there is what I often see that some people have, and this is a very common pattern, is about people pleasing, whereby they are pleasing their managers, employees, their clients, and because there's this need to overgive, and often entrepreneurs do that, they want to give, and the challenge there is that they don't have these boundaries, and because you don't have these boundaries in place, that is something that can be detrimental to your health and well-being as you start to overexert yourself when people need more of you or need you in a different way.
That makes sense. Yeah, because I've made that mistake too, where you want to keep the team happy, so you do something that winds up biting you in the end, biting you in the ass in the end, right?
Yeah.
You almost give them too much, and they take give them an inch and they take a mile, sort of thing,
Yeah.
or you give them permission to behave a certain way that's counterproductive to the business. Yeah, so I've been guilty of that too. I mean, do
Yeah.
you have any examples of that with your clients?
Yeah, well, I mean, when we look at the example of Jubei in the education, what she found is that all her employees would have loads of ideas and they'd come to her and say, I think this is a great idea, let's implement it. What happened is that she has a type of procrastination that I like to call active procrastination, whereby she's a bit of a business creator and she likes to explore all these different ideas. And as entrepreneurs, it's easy for us to feel like we're incredibly productive as we're exploring new business models, new products, and all these things. But as we started to work together, what we figured out is that because of all of this, what had happened is she's now developed, it was up to 12 different programs in this education field. And when we got to the nuts and bolts, and when I look at any business, it's figuring out the Pareto principle, right? Which 20% of your clients give you 80% of the revenue, and figuring out what products have you created or services that people aren't using, and do you need to let them go or reinvent them? And for her, she realized that there was just one business model that was working incredibly well. And it was where she was getting like millions of revenue, and it was just that business model, and everything else was pretty much an expense. And it was just this part of the business was funding everything else. And I think that as entrepreneurs, it's very easy to become accustomed to wanting all these new ideas and staying ahead of the game with regards to creating all these different things. But what she found is that it was incredibly challenging to be able to manage that and to be consistent. So what she did is she ended up cutting about half of all her products and services and then focusing on the people that she really cared about, and actually started to step into being a leader. But the biggest challenge she actually had to overcome was what she felt she had imposter syndrome. What I mean by that is that she really didn't feel like she could be a leader because she's grown with this company, she's done incredibly well, but for her, she doesn't really identify with being the CEO. There was that mismatch. And I think often as entrepreneurs, when we have that misalignment, it can show up in a variety of different ways. And even when she was doing a presentation, she would stumble on her words. She wouldn't have that confidence because part of her felt like she didn't really deserve to be there.
Yeah. I can definitely relate, and I've heard of the imposter syndrome. So what's the best way that you found to get entrepreneurs over that hump to where they feel comfortable wearing the boss pants?
Sure. So when we're looking into wearing the boss pants, right, I use a very, very simple exercise. And that is two simple questions. And the first question is, who are you? Now, when most people think of who are you, it's what they identify with. And very often we look to our past to define who we are. So you may say, I'm a business owner, I'm in the fitness industry, I do this, and we look at that past to define us. The challenge is when you want to do something different in the future, we feel that there's a gap. And very often in human psychology, we feel like we have to do a certain thing in order to be a certain way. So in order for me to be a successful seven-figure entrepreneur, I need to do all those things as a prerequisite. And the challenge there is that there's this doing that has to happen before we become a certain way. So the question that I pose to people is, who must you become in order to live the life that you desire? And using Jube as an example, some of the things that she said was, I need to be able to have congruency. And she wanted to have that authenticity. She wanted to be able to be a leader, not in the sense of just leading people, but actually leading herself, because she felt like she was leaning on other people with regards to pleasing them and not having her own voice. And as we started to look into some of those being things that she had to become, there's this distinction of we don't have to do anything in order to be a certain way, right? We're human beings, not human doings. So she realized she could actually be authentic. She could be congruent, and she could actually be a leader and not have to rely on other people right now, and then it's reinforcing that. And this is where, when we look into our routines, it's important to reevaluate that and to move that forward on a consistent basis. So some of the things that I posed for her to do is to figure out, where have you been congruent today? Where have you been confident? How have you actually started to use these in your business and in your life? And as we start to focus on these, what happens is we start to see how we're actually already becoming that person step by step. And by doing that, that's one of the fastest ways that I see that people overcome this fear of becoming someone or faking it until you make it.
Yeah, I like that quite a bit. Okay. So you feel like you almost have to earn your stripes. And some people feel like they haven't fully earned their stripes because they don't know what it means to earn the stripes to fill those boss pants.
Yeah, and I feel that there's a lot of these stories that people have as well. But when we look at business owners in general, sometimes we have this theme of, well, I'm a victim, or perhaps I'm someone who always needs help, or I'm still someone that's learning, I'm still someone that's that. And when we look into these stories that we tell ourselves, very often that causes us to go on this downward spiral. And I'll give you an example. So there was a man, Edwin, that I dealt with, who he had $1 billion business, and he lost everything, and suddenly he's got this gap between where he was compared to where he is now. And when you have that difference, for him it was very, very challenging to go past this, like an incredibly tall building in Los Angeles that he was once owning, and now suddenly he realizes that, oh wow, I don't own that anymore, and he goes on this downward spiral with regards to a story that he tells himself. And what I often see is that when as entrepreneurs we get into a negative pattern or a negative mindset, and the truth is we all do at some point, what often happens is it's that story that causes us to go on that downward spiral. So what I often find is that looking at that story and figuring out if that story is true and where that actually applies to you, I find that is incredibly impactful for business owners as they reinvent a new story to then help them move forward and look at their life and their business in a different way.
Yeah. That sounds like, so I listened to this podcast called The Science of Success with this, and he was interviewing this neurosurgeon. They were talking about neuroplasticity. And he talked about that, like kind of rewiring your brain, because you can, like, according to those stories, he said the neurons that fire together wire together. So
Yeah.
if you're constantly telling yourself that story, like, oh, I'm a failure because I don't own that business anymore. I'm not a success. I don't have all this money, all of this, prestige. You start telling yourself all that and ruminating on that. And then those neurons kind of fire together. Then all of a sudden, everything you see has that slant to it. And he said, in order to rewire that brain, then you have to be purposeful in seeking out positive stories about yourself and positive, events in your life. And then when you realize that you're doing that, then you pause in the moment to try to slow down time so that you can experience it with all of your senses. And so he said the longer you can sit and ruminate on that, then those neurons start to fire together and they start to wire together. And then you can start telling yourself a positive or an uplifting story about yourself. So that makes total sense. So it sounds like you do a lot of mindset work with these entrepreneurs. Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah. So what does that involve? Like, where's your starting point? What do you like to see them do in order to kind of what you would say consider a successful client story?
Well, I think ultimately when I look into successful client stories, it's usually whereby they have gone from a place of overwhelm and stress and their business isn't where it wants to be, to suddenly they're chilling out. And well, when I get a message from someone from Bali, they're on the beach, they're chilling out, they're working less, and suddenly their business is booming. Like, for me, that's success. And I think that success can come in many forms depending on the person. And rightly, as you were saying, when we start to have these stories or we rewire our brains in certain ways, it causes us to move forward. Because once you make a new connection, the connection stays, it doesn't disappear. And then as you start to reinforce that, myelin builds, and then you can actually build that through time, and it strengthens that connection. So it's almost automatic, so it's similar to the habits that we have. So when I'm working with an entrepreneur, ultimately it's figuring out, what is really blocking them, and how do we put habits and systems in place so that they're in the right state, so they can look at what's going on in the right way. Because the truth is, as entrepreneurs, like, we could put someone in the exact same circumstance when they're in two different moods, and they'll deal with it completely differently, right? Yeah. So this is where, how do you manage that state on a day-to-day basis? So one of the things that I love to have entrepreneurs that work with me do is to develop something called a daily power. So people have their morning routines, and I often have entrepreneurs that work with me, and the first thing they do is they look at their emails, they check it, and shit's hitting the fan, it's all going wrong. And yeah, that really hit home with me when I was in China, and I woke up at 5 in the morning, and I checked my phone, and I've got someone who's sending me an incredibly long message saying that life's not worth living. I've just started with the client and they're getting stressed, and I'm thinking, is that really what I need when I wake up in the morning? Like, I've just got one eye open. Is that really the right way for me to start my day? So this is where, when I look into a daily power, I think of these different elements that I think are important to include. And it varies on person to person, but generally speaking, I find these are very powerful. So the first thing is gratitude. So I think being able to do a gratitude daily practice enables you to look into what you have as opposed to what's missing, especially in the circumstances we're in now. I think it's very easy for us as entrepreneurs to put pressure on ourselves, to have these expectations of where we want to be, as opposed to being grateful for where we are, because that's a better base from which to expand. And then I look into these visualizations. So similar to what you were sharing earlier, if you can visualize it and actually picture it happening, what happens is you're much more likely to move towards it. Your brain starts believing it, and you're focusing on what you want to see as opposed to what you don't. And then I think some sort of grounding exercise whereby energy is coming in and out of your body, depending on how spiritual you are, or you do some sort of meditation to help ground you. And then ultimately, I think doing a bit of exercise or stretching and getting that brain pumping in your body moving is one of the best ways. And I think having those sorts of elements in your morning, I've found, has been fantastic for entrepreneurs to maintain that momentum, as opposed to having an insight and then falling off track and then going on a downward path, which I think people so often do, where they go to an event, they get motivated, they feel great for 2 months, and then suddenly they go downhill, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I like because you've referred to it several times. What I call the shiny object syndrome. You know,
Yes.
everybody kind of, especially entrepreneurs, are prone to that. And so, do you recommend like meditation? Do you ever recommend meditation to any of your clients?
Yeah, I think that for me, it's not about recommending just a tool. It's working out what works best for the person. So sometimes it's meditation. For some
Hmm.
people, they like to get outside, they like to walk, and they like to condition their identity. So they say things like, you know, I'm becoming a multi-million-dollar business owner. I choose to be a leader. I'm becoming this, and doing that and affirming that to themselves. Some people find more powerful. So I have no agenda as to what they do, just as long as they're in the right state and they feel like when they start working, suddenly they're ready to go. And it's not this just dragging out of bed, it's more of I'm actually excited and I'm turned on and I'm ready to rock and roll, as opposed to starting in the first gear.
Yeah, I like that. So, and you've touched on habits, and I think habits are important. And I've read a couple of books on habits, and they say you can't eliminate a habit; you have to replace it.
Yeah, I agree.
And then you've also touched on a morning routine. So, is that something that you use with your clients to help replace some of these habit loops that aren't serving the purpose?
Yeah, I think that if well, what is incredibly important when it comes to entrepreneurs is having the right systems and making it easy. So when someone says to me, I've never done that gratitude before, and we figure out, well, what is it that you do in the morning? Like how can we add on to something that they're already doing? So whether they're making coffee, whether they're doing something like that, and it's I often find one of the best ways instead of reinventing a habit is to stack it onto something else and to reinforce it. And what happens is that becomes incredibly powerful. So for me, really, when I look at someone's overall routine, it's understanding, you know, how do you start and end your workday? Well, what do you actually do in the evening? Do you wind down or are you stressed out? Like, what happens when you have those challenges? Because the truth is, most entrepreneurs are fine 80% of the time. But then there's that 20% of the real challenging stuff, and that's where you've got to lean in. You have to have that awareness and have some ways in which to deal with those challenges that aren't going to affect your business or your health or other people in a negative way.
Gotcha. Okay. And then that makes a lot of sense. And I think routines are important because I think we become creatures of habits.
Yeah.
And like like people, habits run in the background, like almost like software on a computer.
Hmm.
And if people are struggling with reaching a goal, they should re-examine their habits and see if that habit is still serving them well, or if it's keep preventing them from achieving their goal, then maybe they need to change that habit. So I don't like to look at it as good habits or bad habits, but you have to look at it as, is this habit getting me to where I want to go? So how would you approach that with one of your clients?
Sure. Well, for me, really, it's incredibly important to figure out, you know, what are their goals and what are their vision. And I think that for me personally, I think that I move away from calendar year goals. And I think it's very common. People say, okay, this is my 2020 goal, this is my 2019 goal. But as entrepreneurs, we tend to overestimate what we can do in a year. We underestimate what we can do in a decade. And the way that I play around with that is that I set 3-month power year targets for the entrepreneurs that I work with, because 3 months is a period of time that you can actually make some substantial progress, and it's enough that we can usually be much more realistic. Because when it comes to 12 months, usually people either work really hard for the first three and then fall off, or they're not sure. And yeah, when we look at this year, right, you set your January, right, you set your yearly goal, and
Right.
now suddenly that shifts. So for me, I
Yeah.
think that being able to have
Seismically.
that right? So,
Mhm.
and I can relate to that on obviously many levels, from clients I've worked with to how I've changed my plans. And when I look at these 3-month period of time, I find that if you can truly focus on a major and a few minors, it accelerates your progress. And by having that focus, it means that you don't get distracted with all these shiny objects or shiny pennies that we often see. And instead, you can really knuckle down on what's actually going to help you in your life or in your business to really accelerate forward. So for me personally, it's figuring out, okay, what is that vision that you have? What's this power year target that you want to achieve? And then similar to what you were saying, are these habits and routines going to get you there? Because the truth is that very often someone will say to me this really gigantic goal, Ben, I want to put in 50K per month, I can't wait. And I was having a conversation with a lady called Crystal from Canada, and I said, okay, well, let's break this down. And I think it's important that you break down and you figure it out. And we start figuring out, okay, how can you put in that 50K per month? And suddenly we realize she doesn't have the capacity to do that. Even if she had all those clients, she does not have enough time to be able to do that consistently and generate those leads and be able to fulfill those clients. And now all of a sudden, there's a mismatch, there's a misalignment. So the goal is not achievable and not realistic in the time frame. And then by switching that, what happens is suddenly you become more motivated because you can see it actually being accomplished, as opposed to just throwing a number out there, which I think a lot of people do, and not having the systems and the lead generation tools or the marketing needed to actually make it happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just throwing out some kind of ambiguous or, random goal or number instead of like actually kind of reverse engineering it, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think reverse engineering is incredibly important in a variety of aspects of life, whether it's health, whether it's relationships, and being able to have that vision on another tangent. I think that a lot of business owners have a vision for their business, but they don't have a vision for their relationship or their health or from other areas. And I think that that's incredibly important for us as business owners to consider and to figuring out if we're spending this much time building the business and going towards that vision, does it not make sense to have that for our relationship, for our health? Are we becoming the ultimate Spartan warrior we want to become? Like, are we moving forward in that direction, or are we just letting it plateau? And I think that's a real shame when that happens.
Yeah, I agree. I think most people, that's why they get into the business, because they want to have the financial freedom to do what they want and spend time with their loved ones and everything. And then as soon as you get into the business, the entrepreneurial crazy takes over. And before you know it, you're, nose deep in your business and not taking care of your health, not taking care of your loved ones. And then you've got this business that makes you miserable, and then you're miserable at home too and in your life.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges, because I had a client called Ragesh. He has a pharmaceutical business, and he definitely had the when I have this, then I will addiction. And he said to me, he said, Ben, I need to focus on finances. It's my biggest challenge because I want to be able to spend more time with my family. Like, that's what I want. I'm not driven by money. Like, I need the money to spend more time with them. And as we start to dive into it, what we figure out is he could spend much more time with them now. And I think that's often the missing element that people have, is that we feel that there's this prerequisite that we have to do. And for him, it was having that financial success so he could. And instead, he ended up taking an extra day off a week. He's suddenly spending time with his 13-year-old teenage son. And now he's actually bonding with them whilst also focusing on the business. And I think that the beautiful thing is when you can give yourself that space, and then when you're on the business, you're actually on it and you're focused, as opposed to getting stressed out, overwhelmed, and really having no idea really where you're going because you're so in the business. You don't have that time to really reflect as to are you actually heading in the right direction, as opposed to being tunnel visioned and actually not being on the trajectory that you actually really want to be on.
Yeah. You got to pull yourself out of the business. It's like pulling yourself out of the woods just so you can kind of reestablish where you are, get some kind of baseline on where you are and continue that journey.
Yeah, and I think that being able to evaluate and asking yourself questions on a consistent basis is actually one of the best ways to consistently evaluate how you're doing. And it's one of the practices that I also share with all my clients. It's about having a weekly evaluation whereby you ask yourself a series of questions to see if you're actually on track. And you can do this personally, you can do this in your business, and both. And what happens is it's those small tweaks that impact you on your journey. So as opposed to setting a goal, and I know business owners set goal and then a week later they're heading in the complete opposite direction. And it's not even that they have a bad intention, it's just that they forget. And
Right.
as human beings, we do tend to forget these sorts of things. And this is where being able to have those reminders, or having a mentor or a business coach, or someone outside of you, is a fantastic way to really hone in and keep you on track. Because as business owners, as you share with the entrepreneur crazy, it's easy to suddenly get tunnel visioned onto one thing and forget the bigger picture of really why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that you can stay on track. Because do you find, and because I've found this has been my experiences, and for other fitness business owners that I know and I've spoken with, and myself, is that I started my business and I have this concept in my mind, okay, I've got to grind. I've got to grind 24/7. I gotta open in the morning. I gotta close at night. I'm cleaning the bathrooms. I'm vacuuming. I'm training clients. I'm training, staff. I'm doing the marketing. I'm doing all of this, and I feel like that I'm obligated. I'm expected to do that if my business is going to be successful. Instead of looking at, and then I become a slave to my business. It becomes this just albatross around my neck, and I started to almost resent it.
Yeah.
So, and instead of thinking of it in terms of, okay, how do I structure this business to get what I want out of it? Do you
Yeah.
find that a lot?
I think you've hit the nail on the head, which is one of the biggest things that I do, and that's figuring out how you actually want to run your business. Because there's so many business owners that have that mindset of grind, hustle 24/7. If I'm not working, I'm being lazy. I've got to be able to do this, and I've got to make that progress. And yes, I've reached out to 1,000 people. Let's make it 1,200. I've got to do this. And the challenge that occurs there is that very much it does become this burden. So one of the things that I tell people is not just to consider the financial freedom. And often entrepreneurs say, Ben, what I want is financial freedom. I want a business to work by itself. And often when I speak to people with that, I say, well, let's say you did that, right? What else would you actually want? And that's where people start to think, because the truth is you can retire, you can chill out, but very often you don't have that purpose and that meaning. And some people really enjoy doing different aspects of their business. And that's where, if you can figure out what would a fantastic week in my business look like as I was growing? And now suddenly you have a different mindset, or you ask yourself a question like, if I only had 4 hours to work in a whole week, what would I have to do differently in my business? And now suddenly you have more insights and you have a different perspective of how you view things. Perhaps you outsource your marketing. You start to hire different people. You start looking to leverage more. And what happens is, as opposed to working hard and being very busy, you start to be incredibly productive and you start thinking in a smart way.
Yeah, I like that. Easier said than done, because I know
Yeah.
when I wasn't grinding, I felt guilty. It would eat at me. Like I just felt guilty. I'm thinking constantly, I should be doing something. And that was one of the things that COVID really helped me with, because I had 3 months where I really didn't, I didn't have to go into the gym at all, other than to train myself. And so it allowed me to kind of slow down and invite other things into my life, and develop other interests in my life. And so when we opened back up, I started thinking of my business differently. It's like I needed that 3-month period to kind of get over that guilt and realize that it's okay if I'm not busting my ass 24/7, as long as I'm getting what I want out of my business.
Yeah.
I mean, is that
And
something that you've seen?
yeah, and I think that when we speak about this guilt, right, very often there's this driving emotion that is causing business owners to do certain things. It could be guilt. It could not be, a big one is not feeling enough. Another one is, not being loved by those around me if I can't do these things. And that the challenge is that when these negative emotions drive us to a certain degree, and I know when I first started, it was definitely a lot of guilt I had with regards to I'm guilty if anyone goes downhill or if anything happens, because I often, I've had people that are suicidal, and I'm thinking, there's so much responsibility that like I have to be able to be there for them. And I think that there's this there's this challenge that we face as entrepreneurs, and this is where when I work with people, it's figuring out that lifestyle, because the truth is, as an entrepreneur, as you're growing your business, when you're not doing stuff, sometimes you feel guilty that you're not working on your business because you haven't got anything else that you could be doing, or that you're inviting into your life. And I think that's one of the keys is once you have that space and you figure out what are other things that I'd like to invite into my life and I'd like to enjoy as part of my lifestyle. It's a hobby, perhaps it's seeing friends, maybe it's connecting for a board game night, maybe it's wine and cheese, I'm not sure what that is. But suddenly you look at your lifestyle in a very different way, and suddenly the business works around your lifestyle as opposed to the other way around. And it's not saying that you don't hustle and you don't have aims and you don't work hard, but it's giving yourself that space, and suddenly you can not have that internal pressure. And I find that it's counterintuitive, but actually by giving yourself more space, you get more done because you're giving yourself permission to relax. And what I find is that entrepreneurs work even harder because they know they have that time off, right? Like, I know I'm going to take a 4-day weekend, I'm going to chill out, okay, I'm going to get shit done right now because suddenly I'm incredibly focused. And the beautiful thing about that is that you can actually enjoy that journey and you have that productivity, and then you don't feel guilty because you know that you've earned it and you've worked incredibly hard to have that time off.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I say it all the time is that I think if you want to have a really good on switch, then you need to have an equally good off switch. Because a lot of times, like you need to clear the clutter, right? Like if your desk is all cluttered, you probably know where everything is, but it's cluttered, right?
Yeah.
And then if you have that off time, that relaxed time, that chill time, it clears that out, and then all of a sudden, answers or solutions to problems present themselves in that clarity or in that space. Instead of always like just driving hard, nose against the grindstone or shoulder against the grindstone, whatever body part you want to put against the grindstone. Then you're always like, oh, I'm going to figure this out, instead of like, oh, let me chill out. And then you're chilling out. You're like, oh, maybe I'll try that, when I get back to work. I find that a good off switch makes for a good on switch.
Yeah,
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's important to switch off and switch on. And to be honest, I think one of the best things that you can do in business is also to schedule time for doing things that we don't really schedule time for. So an example of this is thinking time. Right, and entrepreneurs thought, Ben, I think, but schedule time to think, really? And I remember hearing this on stage, and I was like, this guy is a crazy nutter. What is he talking about? And when I started to implement it, it actually made a lot of sense. Spending 45 minutes thinking about a question to do with my business, right? Am I really giving my clients what they really want? How could I wow every client that came in here, right? If I had to keep every client that ever tried my business, what would I have to do differently? And suddenly you sit with a question like that, you start racking your brain, and I have found that that's one of the best ways to generate some ideas that I would never think of, that helps to differentiate me from every other person out there that hasn't thought of those things or that doesn't spend those time thinking about that. And I think that as a business owner, if you can actually schedule time to think about certain aspects of your business and do that, and you do that on a weekly basis, what tends to happen is you get these new ideas that help you move forward. And by no means am I saying that every business owner has to do it, But I found that this is a fantastic technique to help people move forward. And then there's other things to think about as well. Perhaps it's every Friday you give yourself that time to deload everything. Whether you're planning the next week, whether you're clearing your desk, or you're doing different things that, even though it doesn't seem like work, it's actually incredibly valuable to then enable you to then start the week running as opposed to reacting and dealing with things that you didn't deal with previous.
Yeah, I like that a lot because I think, at least in the fitness industry, a lot of fitness business owners, I mean, because it's a very competitive industry. I mean, you can open up a training studio like mine and you can have a dozen, competitors within a
Mm.
stone's throw of your business. So you're, wind up, and I'm speaking for myself, but I know that I'm not alone. You spend so much time like following your competitors on social media, and trying to one up them or chase them,
Yeah.
and but if you take that time to think, then it's like, well, what do I want to do? What is my mission? What, you know, is my authentic self? You know what I
Yes.
mean? Instead of chasing people, it's like, well, what do I want to happen? What do I want my clients to experience? I want my business to uh, become? What is the mission of my business? What do I need to do with my employees? And then you start to come up with these original solutions that are authentic to you,
Yeah.
and that's really what business is all about. And I love the analogy of a deload day. I mean, because everybody in the fitness industry can relate to what we call a deload cycle. So if you're doing a
Yes.
periodization, your body just can't go pedal to the metal 100% of the time, because you wind up overtraining, you wind up burning out, you wind up with injuries, and
Yes.
it's the same with entrepreneurship. So you need that deload week in order for all those changes to take place, in your tissues, so that you can start to progress again. And so it's no different for your mind or your business, right?
Yeah, most certainly. And I think that very easy when we look in the fitness industry of constantly going 100%, 100%, 100%. But you've really hit the nail on the head. And I think that as entrepreneurs, if you can plan that in advance, then it's there. Because I often see entrepreneurs that say, yeah, I'll get to that someday. And, someday is never really going to come.
It's like
So
moving to the beach.
yeah,
Yeah.
most certainly. It's funny you mentioned that. I had a client that wanted to do art and chill by the beach. She's actually a detective, believe it or not. She's a very fascinating lady, so I've got to be on my best behavior. And one of the things that she said is, I'd love to be able to move to the beach and to just do art. And I asked her, well, I'm just asking you, could you do that maybe on an Airbnb? Like, could you at least implement a little bit of that? And what she ended up doing, and I was chatting to her the other day, is she goes to the beach, for a whole week each month, and she just chills out and relaxes and just rests and chills out. And I'm not saying in the fitness industry, obviously there's a challenge there with regards to, you've got your studio and there's different people that you
Mhm.
need, but if you can actually schedule a day or even half a day where you just strategize, where you chill out, where you take an inventory of actually what's going on, I think that awareness is incredibly powerful, because with that, you can then start to see your trajectory and, as you said, come up with these authentic ways to be different and ultimately to be yourself. Because I think authenticity, especially nowadays, sells more than anything else, because they have that human connection that I think so many people are missing in all industries across the board.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. It's keeping up with the Joneses, and one thing that I do want to touch on, I feel like I have to be careful with this because this hits home with you, but
Sure.
you know, I mean, suicidal thoughts are a very real reality for entrepreneurs, for everybody. But I
Yes.
think especially now with COVID, the way it's affected the economy and everybody's business, and,
Yes.
everybody's business has been hit by this. And so it's a real issue. So, like, walk us through, like, like your dad, like what was
Sure. Sure.
going
Sure.
on with him?
Well, when I look into what happened with my dad, and I think that anyone that commits suicide, and we look at people like Robin Williams, or we look at other people that people are very aware of, there are these two factors that with suicidal people are the most impactful, that generally lead to people having suicide ideation or wanting to commit suicide, and that is relationships and money. And often when they come intertwined, they're incredibly challenging. And when I think of my dad, I think that it's very easy to look at it was this, it was that as a trigger, but very often it's these combination of factors over time that tend to chip away at people, and they start to move into those dark moments. I think definitely relationships has one impact. I think there was money as well, and I think that ultimately there's the challenge of regrets as well, of I'm not where I want to be. And I think that whenever I worked with someone who is in a place like that, it's figuring out how can they have a compelling future. Because ultimately that's what's missing when someone is having those thoughts, is that I can't see it being better than it is right now. It's only going to go downhill. And that's where, when I mention these downward spirals or these thoughts or these stories that we tell ourselves, what happens is people go on this downward spiral over time. And if you don't have a way to interrupt that pattern or to move you out of it, it becomes incredibly challenging. And there was a lady that I worked with called Anna, who's from Germany, and she would go through these oscillations of working incredibly hard and then just burning out and feeling really down about herself. And it was in those moments where she would feel depressed and suicidal. And I remember when I met her, she said, "Ben, I can't see myself living past 35. It's always been in my head." And I asked how old she was, and she says 34 and a half. And now I'm thinking, wow, now I've got a bit of pressure, right? I was like,
tick,
shit.
tick, 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 tick. Yeah.
Yeah, literally. And when I start to work with those people, it's figuring out those different parts of them. And it's this journey where when you have that compelling future and you can give that to someone, and especially during this period, when we have these expectations and we have this internal pressure, this is where I often challenge people to have that authentic connection and share with another human being. Because as entrepreneurs, when you ask how it's going, an entrepreneur will say, "Great." And I'm like, "All right, well, tell me how it's actually going." And then you have a conversation, and it's often vulnerable and it takes courage to be able to connect with someone on that level. But what you find is having that connection is one of the best ways as an entrepreneur to have that stability of those friends and having that authentic connection that we often miss as entrepreneurs, because it's an incredibly isolating journey when you're running your own business, especially nowadays where a lot of people are apart and you're not with your team. To be able to deal with that yourself is incredibly challenging.
Yeah. And I find that it helps if, like, if you're a business owner, I firmly believe that only another business owner can really understand what's going on with you. So I think it's really important to have that as part of your circle, as another business owner that you can, um, you know, just open up to and share. Not necessarily looking for solutions, but just looking for an ear that understands exactly what you're going through.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest challenges is that very often we feel that we're helping when we offer solutions, whereas one of the best things we can do is actually listen and to trust that the person will figure it out. And I think that's one of the best things. And I often say to people, get mentorships, get coaching, have people beside you, because they're there to fully support you. They have no alternative agenda. Like it's for you giving that perspective, and it's often those tiny little insights that you get over time that just completely shift your trajectory. And as an example with Anna, she started to shift her mindset. She was flying to New York, different places. She becomes no longer suicidal. And then a year later, she says, "Ben, I want to do my business full time." She starts doing that. And then she's actually a person that went to a retreat in Bali and then sends me a message next to a waterfall. And it's like moments like that where a client says that they can't see through things. They've tried therapists, they've tried counselors, they've tried all these things. And I think that ultimately when something like that happens and I see the impact that I've had on someone who is genuinely in an incredibly challenging period, I find that is incredibly fulfilling in so many different levels. And going out to dinner with a past client or doing those things, and I think that that's so amazing to be able to celebrate in those stories of our clients, no matter what industry we're in.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, just that socialization and that time outside of the business is incredibly important, and that support system, building that support system. But that takes action, man, and you have to have some courage there. I mean, because you're bearing your soul, so you got to have somebody that you're able to build some trust with.
Yeah, and I actually see that for a lot of entrepreneurs, there's this element of shame that I see of feeling shameful of sharing where they actually are and what's really going on, and I shouldn't feel this way, and why isn't this happening? And I think that it's that sort of element that when you can have that connection with someone, and yes, it takes time, yes, there's trust, and I think that often it's our own internal barriers, which are one of the biggest things there, the being able to do that. And I agree, having business owners are important, but we can also lean on friends and family, and they may not
Hmm.
be able to relate entirely. I mean, I have friends who have absolutely no idea, they still really don't know what I do, right? They're doing architecture, all these things, but by having that connection, and we can lean and we can speak in different terms, and they'll never understand completely, but even having that is incredibly liberating to be able to connect with people and share what's going on. Because the truth is, we're all humans and we all experience, stress to some degree. It's just a
Hmm.
little bit different when you're an entrepreneur building your own business.
Yeah, no question about it. All right, Ben. Well, this has been great. I really enjoyed it, and I would like to reserve the right to have you back on the podcast sometime soon, because I would like to take a deeper dive into this, especially what we were just talking about, how suicidal ideations or thoughts of suicide, because I think it's fairly common, and I think relationship problems are really common with entrepreneurs.
Oh yeah.
It's the nature of the beast, right? But it's one of those things that it's the elephant in the room. Nobody ever talks about it. Nobody ever has that conversation. And I think it's a conversation that needs to be had.
Oh yeah, when we chat about relationships, there are so many funny stories that I can talk to you about. Clients who are married and issues and challenges and some really cool tools to be able to do that. So yes, I give you that right. I'm more than happy to share again
Yeah,
if you
awesome.
have me, and we can talk about a different topic.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, I'm interested in that. But I always close out. This is my favorite part of the show. I always close out with three questions that I ask every guest. And it's my favorite part because I think we get some of the best answers. And I think I have an idea of what this might be, but I'll ask anyway. So, what has been your most successful failure? And by that, I mean, at the time, it seemed like a devastating loss that you weren't going to be able to recover from, but you were able to take life lessons from it that propelled you to greater success down the road.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think the most obvious answer there is, losing my dad to suicide, and I really do
Mhm.
see that as a blessing, despite how that may come across, because without that, it wouldn't have changed the trajectory of my life, and being able to help people that have been suicidal to be able to have the impact that I'm now having on entrepreneurs is definitely been one of the biggest assets to me, and I think that for those listening, when you can turn the worst day of your life into the best day of your life, then you become free. And I think that's so important, and so many people miss that. And I guess that's something that I would leave people with to consider, because it's incredibly profound when you can make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So, what are some of the lessons that you were able to take from that personally that um, made you feel like this was the best day of your life?
Well, for me, I think that the realization that success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure. And that if all
Mm.
you're aiming to do in life is to have success and have money and forgetting about what is most important along the way, I think that really hits home. And when I think about my dad, and my parents got divorced when I was 15, I was much younger, and I think that when I look at him in his life, he was someone that was incredibly bubbly, like an amazing person, a real giver. And I think that when I look at him and I think of Robin Williams, someone else who was a giver, someone that really gives back to other people, I think that it's so important to be able to give back, but you've got to fill up your own cup first, and you have to be able to have fun. And I think that there's so many people that work so hard, and yet we forget that we work hard to enjoy life. And I see so many people that just aren't enjoying it. And it's often the smallest things and the magic moments that we have in the day that I feel that if we're not paying attention, we really miss. Whether that's me popping out in the middle of the day and buying an ice cream because obviously it's sunny here, the sun's about to come down, and giving that to my wife, or doing something that's so small that actually means so much to people around us, whether it's a smile or those little interactions. I think that's what really made me think about life and why I'm doing what I'm doing, because the truth is life is short, and I think that very often we are so focused on creating this financial freedom, doing this, that we miss being able to have that authentic connection with all the people that we meet along the way.
Yeah, we can have little bits of that along the way. We don't have to wait till the end of the road, right?
Yes.
For that, when I get this, like you said at the beginning of the show.
Yes,
I like that.
Yes.
All right. Well, my next question is, since you've been in this industry, what has been the biggest surprise that you've had to deal with that you did not see coming?
The biggest surprise that I had to deal with, I think the biggest surprise ever to me was when I volunteered at a Tony Robbins event. And I'm in the, I'm with this guy, we're having a blast, he's in his 50s, we're just cracking up, like having the most amazing time. And on the third day, we start talking, I share what I do, we haven't even chatted about that yet. And he turned to me and he said, Ben, I'm suicidal. And for me, that was just like, it blew my mind that I'm in this industry, I know what I'm doing, yet sometimes you never know. And I think for me, that just really hit home that no matter what is going on and how someone, like what someone is like and how they're sharing, sometimes you really never know what is really going on. And that's the client that ended up having that $1 billion business, losing everything, best friend stole his private jet, his wife had an affair, he went to jail for 2 years. And for me, it's that perspective for me that makes my life feel so much more joyous, that number one, I get to help someone like that, but also hearing of all the different stories that people have gone through, that, really, I think that I'm so grateful, and my life is a blessing compared to what other people have had to experience in their life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that comes down to having real conversations with people, and giving them permission to be vulnerable with you. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
most
that's
certainly.
huge.
And I think that when it comes to vulnerability, as a leader, you've got to go first. And whether you're in the fitness industry and you're talking to your employees, or you're doing something different, like, you have to be someone that goes first, because that's what leaders have to do, especially when it comes to vulnerability.
I like that. I like that. All right. And then my last question is, where do you go for your personal and professional development?
Oh, so
Now you look like you're like in a witness protection program or
I
something.
know, this is quite exciting, isn't it? I've got the sun coming down. I'm not sure if this is on video, but it's just like starting to creep down. It's all very exciting.
Yeah.
It's going quite hot. It's quite nice. I feel like this is quite a fun little change. All right, cool. So personal and professional, right? I'll take them slightly differently. So generally speaking, for me, from a personal standpoint, if there's an element that I want to improve, I'm most likely to hire a coach for it, or someone that's been there and done that, for me personally. So for example, maybe we can dive into this next time. There was a time where I was incredibly overweight, and I hired a fitness coach online to be able to help me lose a ton of weight and start to get fit again, because my body started breaking down. I was sitting there taking calls, and I wasn't doing what I needed to do for my health. So for me, from a personal standpoint, I often seek different articles or different resources depending on what it is. So from a financial perspective, I have subscriptions that I have coaches, like I said, I have mentors. From a professional standpoint, when I look at where I get my resources from, once again, for me personally in the coaching industry, right now, as an example, this year, when everything happened with COVID, the first thing I did was hire a business coach, because I thought there is not a chance in hell I'm attempting to do this myself. Like, someone's got to know what they're doing better than I do at this point. And for me, the reason why I say that and why I'm so why I think that's so important is as a small exercise that I often give everyone when I do events. Obviously, it's different for the people listening, but I'll challenge them to do it as well. So what I do, and I'll ask you to do it as well, is to raise your hand as high as you can. So if you raise your hand as high as you can, and I say, no, as high as you can, like genuinely is like, right, suddenly what happens is you stretch, right? Similar to in the fitness coaching industry, right? And you can put it down is that suddenly you can push yourself further. And as a fitness coach, you guys will know when you're with a client, you can push them further, you're there. And that's the difference that I see in my business, in my personal life, which is why if I really want to make progress, I know I'm going to get coaching. Like I can read a book, I can go on a course, but I know for me, the biggest impact is going to happen when I have someone one-on-one working with me, whether they have a course that I can go through, cool, but something where I have that tailor-made advice to me to help me move forward. And yes, I read I listen to a lot of books on Audible, and I have those resources, and I do events. Well, I used to attend a lot of events offline, now it's more online. But ultimately for me, I think that in every area of my life, that's pretty much the strategy I've taken, and that's helped me leapfrog leaps and bounds to be able to impact people from all walks of life.
I like that quite a bit, and it makes total sense. All right, Ben, this has been great. I've really enjoyed it. And we'll let you go before you get any weird tan lines.
I'm in the sun, right? It's gonna be
right. So tell our listeners, where can they get in touch with you, find more information, reach out to you, all that good stuff?
Sure. So they can connect with me at ben-ivey.com. So I-V-E-Y. I'm not a plant. And they can download some hacks at ben-ivey.com/overwhelm. I've got lots of resources to help people, but you can connect with me on my website, and I'm more than happy to point you in the right direction.
Awesome. And those links will be in the show notes. Just go to trainerjim.net. Click on this episode of the podcast, and all the links to contact Ben will be right there. So Ben, thanks again, man. Have a good rest of your day. What is it, about 6 o'clock or so over there, 6:30?
Yeah, it's 6:30. I'm going to have some food. I'm going to have a shower. I'm actually getting quite hot now. It's quite nice in London. I wasn't expecting this.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to chill out with my wife, relax, and maybe have a drink too.
Okay, awesome. Well, have a good rest of your night, and thanks for taking the time, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Till next time. Yeah. All right. Well, and Ben, what I'll do, so you're number 2 in the queue. So this one will be out in about 4 weeks. So right before it comes out, I'll send you the artwork, the links, the copy, all of that stuff that we use to push out through our network. And then you can do the same and push it out through yours.
Yeah, sounds good. And then let me know if you do want to dive into that recording. Like, I'm more than happy to sort that out, and we can book a date in advance, but you can just ping me a message when you want to do that. And I'm sure we'll have a pretty fun conversation. But I really appreciate the interview. I think I really like your style of having that those questions and back and forth. And I'm excited to be able to serve the fitness entrepreneurs at a different level with regards to a new topic next time.
Oh, great, man. Thanks. I appreciate it, man. I really do. And I'll definitely have you back on for sure.
Sure. Amazing. All right, buddy. Well, take it easy.
All right, thanks. All right. You too.
See you soon.
All right. Have a good day. Good night.
All right.